This is a time of great challenge for our country, but also a time of great opportunity.
Relief for consumers, revenue enhancement, and the return to economic prosperity. They're the features of Budget 2022, the way forward, and already revenue forecasts and improved GDP are setting the stage for those long-awaited events.
At the end of June 2021, debt was at 101% of GDP, and now we are at 87.5%.
With rising inflation, a symptom of the COVID-19 pandemic, continuing to impact consumers, the government has targeted key areas to bring relief.
We have reduced the duty on a significant number of food items to bring relief to our citizens and residents. You will hear more about this reduction in customs duty on food items during the course of the debate.
In the market for your first home? Well, this concession should sit well with you.
Currently, concessions are available for persons who purchase a home for the first time. We are expanding these concessions so that people who purchase a home or purchase land and construct their first home or purchase a house and renovate it to be their first home will receive the same level of concession. For those who are constructing or renovating their first home, we will refund up to $40,000 in cash for any VAT paid for construction services. We are reducing the duty on roofing materials, plumbing materials, and electrical supplies. This will make it more affordable for everyone in the Bahamas to undertake any construction project. We've also reduced the duty on electric cars with a value of under $70,000 to 10%. For vehicles over $70,000, the duty will be 25%. The same framework that presently exists for all hybrid cars. These duty adjustments are part of a deliberate strategy to reduce nationally our carbon footprint.
Also boasting of a deficit reduction, the government has vowed to use the windfall to address $1 billion in unsettled claims and arrears, the Prime Minister lamenting that they've been able to persist.
We'll be seeking parliamentary approval for a supplementary budget for additional recurrent expenditure of $216,928,017. These outstanding balances include $56.7 million owed on insurance for the public servants.
Wow, that's right. Yeah.
$45 million in arrears owed to Water and Sewage Corporation to settle balances to vendors. $30 million for the completion of the Andre Rogers Baseball Stadium. $19 million in outstanding payments owed to Doctors Hospital.
Against the backdrop of a COVID-19 pandemic, the government is also focusing on bringing down burdensome healthcare costs, especially for chronic patients, and finally remedying Grand Bahama's inadequate healthcare system.
I'm really pleased to be able to announce that we have allocated $10 million for catastrophic healthcare in this budget. This means that, Madam Speaker, for the first time, the government can provide meaningful assistance to long-term dialysis patients, heart patients, and others facing serious medical issues.
Yes, sir. You saw them.
You
heard them.
We have also provided funding to capitalize the Grand Bahama Health Center Development Company.
Wow.
This entity will construct the new Grand Bahama Hospital.
Yeah.
This is being facilitated through a loan for $150 million, which is now being finalized.
The government will also institute creative revenue enhancement measures. These measures will include the reintroduction of business license fees for insurance companies and banks. Keeping you in the know, this is OPM Press Now.
As he outlined the way forward for public servants, Prime Minister Davis announced that pay increases, including the reinstatement of increments, is on the horizon for those in the public sector.
We have included amounts for pay increases for most public officers. This is because we recognize that the public officers have not had a general salary increase since we were last in office. At this time, we also like to announce the full reinstatement and payment of all outstanding increments.
An estimated $24.4 million has been given to public servants during the last 9 months as staff reclassifications, promotions, and increment payments have resumed. That's been good news for civil servants, many of whom have been lamenting the increase in the cost of living. And to that, the Prime Minister presented the resolve of increasing minimum wage.
We also believe that the rate of minimum wage needs to increase because of the general erosion of spending power of ordinary Bahamians. An imperative which has been made more urgent by the current level of inflation. To this end, we have submitted the proposal to PSU to increase minimum wage in the public sector with incremental increases starting in July.
As many do not have a pension plan, the Prime Minister, in consultation with the Public Service Union, plans to introduce a contributory pension plan. Outlined in the budget is also wage increases for teachers and nurses.
We have provided funding to increase the salary of teachers, but we have also provided funding to pay what I call a retention bonus to teachers and nurses.
Keeping you in the know, this is OPM Press Now.
On the street, you have people coming and saying, thank you so much for what you've done, and you want to say, what have I done? But they come right out, they say, there was money on my account that I understand is my back pay and increments. I got my letter. So the feeling of gratitude from public servants is wonderful, and I can't wait till everyone is able to feel that level of satisfaction.
We see very strong bookings. We've been able to get airlift going again. We're attracting record numbers of LPIA. Cruise lines are coming in 5-6 a day. So this has been our mission, really, to move the economy. Tourism drives the economy, as everyone knows. And it was important for the government really to get the level of activity going again.
The most fulfilling part of being the Minister of Housing is being able to see the smiles on the faces of the families when they become homeowners, when they turn their keys to their home. So if as many families, as many places, as many islands in the Bahamas that I can touch and bring that dream to a reality for persons, that'll be the greatest feeling for me.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, media colleagues, and those joining us via the stream. It is a pleasure to welcome you to the Office of the Prime Minister's weekly press briefing. Today we have a very exciting briefing planned for you. We know that there were some exciting news coming out of the House yesterday, and we're going to expand on that a little bit more in this press briefing. Coming now to introduce our guest is Press Secretary Clint Watson.
Thank you, Jillian. And good morning, colleagues, and all of you who are tuning in and watching. We are so excited to be able to talk to you this week over what has no doubt been an exciting Wednesday, an exciting week as Prime Minister Davis released his administration's first official budget for 2022-2023. And we are really excited and humbled by the feedback that we've gotten, but more eager for the administration to get to work and to be able to implement all of those plans that are in that budget. We know that after hearing so much information, no doubt colleagues here may have a lot of questions on what exactly is the budget all about, some of the numbers in the budget and how it's going to be implemented. And so I'm so excited that the gentlemen who lead the bulk of this work, our minister responsible for economic affairs and our financial secretary, are both here to be able to take your questions and shed more light for you ahead of the debate, which will begin next week, Wednesday. And let me just say right here that there are a lot of the details will come out once the debate gets underway in the House of Assembly. Various ministers, parliamentary secretaries, members of parliament will each speak to their particular portfolio and outline in greater detail the numbers and the plans that they will be executing. So don't be overly concerned if you have a lot of questions you're not hearing answered yet. Those will be answered once the debate gets underway beginning next week, Wednesday. But I wanted to start with that, and I think I'll come back afterward with my announcements. Since we're already on the theme of the budget, I'll just go right into bringing the minister and, of course, the financial secretary up to make any comments and take any questions that you may have regarding that. So without further ado, Minister of Economic Affairs, Senator Michael Alcides, and then, of course, he'll be joining with our Financial Secretary, Simon Wilson, to come.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Watson. Good morning, everybody, members of the media and those watching by stream. I think we'd look to reserve the bulk of our interaction today for questions. But just to reiterate, as I think everybody knows, as the budget is the most watched event on the parliamentary calendar, budget was presented yesterday. The aim, as said by the Prime Minister, three main themes: looking to bring some relief to Bahamians from the increases in the cost of living that we have seen as a result of events that have impacted us. And so we saw some relief in terms of customs duty reductions on items from food items to building materials to computer equipment, cabling equipment, etc., as well as some relief brought in the real property tax regime, and as well the expansion of exemptions available to individuals either purchasing a first home or constructing or actually renovating a first home. The second theme was a focus on education and training, and some initiatives were announced, including an increase in education budget and collaboration, for example, with the LJM Maritime Academy to train Bahamians to take advantage of the many hundreds, and as the Prime Minister says, possibly thousands of jobs that would be available for Bahamians who get that training, and investments in security, including physical security and, of course, health, with the allocation for catastrophic assistance. As Mr. Watson said, the debate commences on the 1st of June. It will run approximately until about the 16th of June in the House of Assembly is what we estimate, and then it goes to the Senate we are looking to have it in the Senate on the 20th of June so that we might complete it that week, and it comes into effect on the 1st of July. Again, as has been stated, the ministers will elaborate on their segments of the budget. There was a lot that was announced yesterday, so as the debate goes on, ministers will elaborate on their ministries. And what we will do here is, as again, during these weekly briefings for the duration of the budget debate, as questions arise, and issues might come up, we will be available to answer them here, as well as have further interaction with the press. And so I know you might have a lot of questions, and so I'll just open it right now for any questions you might have. FS, you wanted to make an opening statement, or you will just be here for the questions? Okay. Before we begin, Mr. Clint Watson said that the bulk of the work was done by myself and Mr. Wilson, but I must give the bulk of the work done by the technical people in the Ministry of Finance, led by Mr. Simon Wilson and his team in the budget and revenue sections, as well as customs, and really throughout all segments of the public service, worked really hard on putting this together. We give the policy direction and support, but much of the work, the actual grunt work and the late nights, are done by the financial secretary, his team, the budget section, the revenue section. So we just want to publicly thank them as well for all the work they've done in the preparation, and as we go forward into the debate and the defense and the actual implementation. So with that, I'd just like to open any questions you might have. Please feel free.
We heard the Prime Minister say yesterday that the government hopes to start increasing minimum wage in July. That's for the public sector. Is that going to trickle over to the private sector? Does the government plan to raise minimum wage for the private sector?
It is the intention for it to go into the private sector as well. As you know, there is what is called a tripartite council, which is a collaboration between the government, the labor segment, which is represented by the labor unions, and as well the employment, the employers who are represented by the Bahamas Employment Confederation. And so what they do is they collaborate, and they get together, and then they make suggestions to the government on what the quantum should be and what the timing should be. And I understand that they are very close to making that presentation to the government. So yes, that's a long way to say yes. It is the intention. Of course, the government can control what it does in the public sector, and through its collaboration in the tripartite council as well. So we expect that to follow shortly after, ideally, perhaps even at the same time.
What has been the response from the private sector? Because, we're coming out of a pandemic, the economy is opening, and businesses are getting back to normal. Are they receptive to increase in minimum wage in the private sector? Was the response?
There will always be an element that says, the timing. You just enunciated several things, coming out of the COVID, inflation, whatever. The fact of the matter is, for some people, there will never be the right time to do it. But again, the other fact of the matter is, the cost of living is going up, and we need to bring that relief. And so we hear that, but the fact of the matter is, if it wasn't COVID, unfortunately, some people would always find a reason not to do it. But frankly, at the levels that the minimum wage is at now, people cannot live. So it is something that has to happen.
How many public servants are on minimum wage?
I think very few. The FS might have the number when he comes up, but actually there's very few. There might be some, I think, might be not on the permanent pensionable staff, but perhaps working for some of the ancillary local government, school boards, etc., possibly. But that is a number we can find for you.
Minimum wage, but is livable wage also part of that?
Livable wage is part of the discussion. As you might be aware, there was a study done, and I think it was released last year, either early this year or last year, speaking about minimum wage both in New Providence and Grand Bahama. And I think the number was north of $600, I believe, if I recall correctly. And so that is a commitment to move towards. That is something that will happen gradually. The Ministry of Labor, through its Decent Work program, is doing a lot of work in that area. That is aspirational to move towards. I think I know the nearer term objective is to have the increase in the minimum wage, which will bring that relief.
And no figure for that yet?
For the livable?
For the minimum.
The minimum, I think we discussed $250. Yeah.
I know obviously there was, in the budget, there would have been a number of relief initiative announced, but I didn't hear anything as relates to gas relief. Are you able to say if that's something that will be discussed as the budget continues?
Even now, as you know, we've been having a series of meetings with the retailers. They are very, I should say, distressed. They are facing some enormous challenges. Our position has been that it would be very, very difficult for the government to approve a margin increase at this time, which will only lead to higher prices at the pump and more pressure on the consumer. And so what we have been doing is having some discussions to find out ways where we can bring relief to them directly based on the things that they are facing, inclusive of things like higher rents, franchise fees, the increased amount of money that they have to outlay for inventory, meaning they have to spend more just to fill their tanks because of the rising prices. We think we have some ideas that we're going to, as I said before, they put some positions to us. We mull them over. Our technical folks have come up with something that we think might work. We just need to agree it internally, and hopefully we can put something to them that can help them, even if it's a temporary measure until some of these issues subside. We don't have one scheduled yet, but we'll be in communication with them by telephone.
Can you provide some clarity on the debt management strategy beyond the sinking fund?
Maybe when you say so beyond, well, okay. We have a debt management strategy that we have published, a medium-term debt management strategy. It shows how we intend to manage it over the next 3 years. And we also publish what we call an annual borrowing plan. And I think that comes out soon because we have indicated how much the maximum borrowing authority that we are seeking from Parliament. And so the strategy is, and so it's a very general question, so I'll try and cover it as best I can. We have inside, in the Ministry of Finance, we have a debt management unit that's led by a very distinguished former governor of the central bank and staffed with some very seasoned people who their job is to keep an eye on the debt, and their mission is to minimize the cost as best we can, and as well manage the maturities, so that as financing becomes due, we're in a position to either roll over or retire it without too much stress. In addition, as you know, we have the Private Sector Debt Advisory Committee, which is made up of private sector individuals who are also giving a look at the debt and making suggestions to us. So the strategy is, yes, we have the sinking fund, which is an amount of money put aside every year, so that when the time comes, for example, when debt, let's give an example, if we have a $500 million loan, for example, coming due, or a bond, the idea is to put a little bit aside every month, every year, every budget year, so that when the time comes to repay that, it doesn't, you're not left with, okay, we have to come up with 500. You have something in a sinking fund. It's like you're putting something away to go towards it. So the idea, the overall strategy, you have the sinking fund, but we also are targeting 3 main things in our debt. We want to reduce the amount of foreign currency debt and gradually get back towards, right now it's about 45% foreign, 55% local, foreign meaning foreign currency, 55% B dollar. We want to get back to a point where it's more 70-30, 80-20 in favor of local foreign. So we want to move that percentage back, and we want to manage our maturity so that we're not faced with a whole bunch of debt. If I were to use a colloquialism. Apologies to the English teachers. But so we're not faced with a situation where we have a whole lot of maturities coming due and it's unmanageable. And the third thing is to manage the cost. And so how do we manage the whole structure so that we can minimize the cost? Those three things. The foreign currency Bahamian dollar mix, getting your optimal maturity so that you're not faced with a whole lot coming due at one time and it becomes difficult for you, and managing the cost. So that is the strategy.
In yesterday's presentation, there was mentioned that the government intends to impose a minimum tax fee on high-end properties, also clamping down on foreign yacht owners. For successive governments, there's been talk about taxing the rich as opposed to the poor. Is this a move to do that, and how successful does this administration think it will be in doing so?
Two things. Listening to the debate yesterday, I leaned over to my colleague and said, it sounds so wonderful. There's standing ovations for the first time, but we must execute. And so I think that is your question, how do we execute? It's not so much, I would say, targeting the rich, but our strategies has always been, when we talk about revenue administration, making sure that those who have the ability to pay and those who owe the government can pay. And who can pay, do pay. All right? So of three things let's talk about three things we did. We had a cap on real property tax. So no matter how big or how much your home was valued, your owner-occupied home was valued, the maximum you could pay was $60,000. To put in some perspective, to get a real property tax bill for $60,000, your house must be worth $9.6 million. We have raised that cap to $120,000 because the view is that when you get to those levels and you do it in comparison to someone who's living in, let's say, a Bahamian living in an $800,000 or $1 million home, comparatively, the person in the lower value home is paying more. So when we talk about fairness, we said, okay, we'll move the cap from 60 to 120. For someone to pay $120,000 in property tax on their home has to be worth $19.2 million, I think is the figure. So we think that is equitable. In terms of the issue you made about the minimum tax, there has been an issue that where we had, for example, individuals putting a condo or an apartment into a rental pool and being able to access the homeowner's exemption as a part of the Hotel Encouragement Act, getting exemption on property tax. But we weren't earning any revenues, for example, from the room tax that is supposed to come back if something is rented. So that is an attempt to close that loophole, saying if it's rented, we should get something on the rental, and if we don't get anything on the rental, we're going to have to get something on the property tax. So it's an effort to close a loophole that we have identified. In terms of the yacht charters, that has been a vexing problem as well. There is a 4% fee on charters, so if they charge a fee to do a charter, the government is supposed to get 4%. What we're saying now is those individuals have to register for VAT, so we will get VAT on the cost of the charter because, the charters are coming into our waters, they're enjoying our environment, they're making money from it. The government of Bahamas has to expense money to make sure our environment is in good order, to make sure that we have, for example, defense force and police around so that people feel safe. So we feel it's justified that we earn something from that. It's our resources that are being used to generate this money, so we should get something for it. We don't think it's onerous. We did some checks and we found, for example, that if you do a charter in the Mediterranean, I think the VAT on it is 22%. We're charging 10%. So we don't think that would chase away anybody. But we always get, and we always get whenever you do these things. I remember when we introduced the $50, I think it was a $50 fee for processing for private airplanes. Was it $50? And when I served in the previous administration, we said to individuals, if you are using a Family Island airport, you're landing a private aircraft, or any airport, you're landing a private airport, flying your own plane in, it's going to be a $50 processing fee. And you had people saying they're going to not come here, and they're going to go to Turks and Caicos because we put in a $50 fee, right? Now we have, and we never had a reduction. We just had increase in private aircraft, et cetera. I say that to say, people will say, okay, you're doing this, it's going to kill the, the charter industry, right? Well, we don't think so. And as a matter of fact, we think that, and I'll say it, we think that individuals have been having a windfall for a long time at our expense, and it's time that we get what we think is our fair share. We have a beautiful environment. People can come and enjoy it, yes, but we have to preserve it and we have to maintain it. So, you know, if you go anywhere else in the world, you pay. Give us that little thing.
In response to the opposition leader who yesterday said that this new budget does not address the high cost of living, and he pointed to the government's nearly $700 million borrowing and said that the Davis administration did not explain how this intended high level of borrowing will impact the figures outlined in the budget. In response,
My response.
He also noted that it doesn't address the energy crisis at PPL as well. That was going to be my
Well, I'll let you do yours. Let me talk about this one first. No, I think he's dead wrong, because the fact of the matter is, you know, the issue that has been exercising Bahamians is the cost of living, specifically the cost of food. There's been a vigorous debate about, you know, the decision of the government to eliminate the zero rating on breadbasket items, and that has been a bully pulpit for the opposition. What we did in this budget is food items were, for the most part, they were always very low rated. A lot were customs duties was 5%. A lot of it was 0. But what we decided to do this time is we tackled items that, you know, Bahamians buy when they go in the grocery store. Chicken parts, but, you know, leg quarters, wings, drumsticks, etc. Pork chops, ribs, turkey wings. We dropped the duty on chicken from 30% to 10%, on pork from 25 to 10. And from turkey, I think it was from 30 down to 10 or 15. And on some other food items, as well as prepared foods, etc. There's a whole list, right? In speaking to retailers, they would tell you, and if I'm sure, you know, during the course of the next few days and weeks, you can speak to the retailers and the community stores. They will tell you that when Bahamians come to shop for their weekly grocery bill, you know, they're not, you know, filling the trolley up with corned beef. It's chicken wings, chicken leg quarters, those sorts of things. That's what we consume. Those of us who aren't vegans, right? And so that will have a significant impact on the cost of food, the actual food that people consume the most. All right. We have already been in discussions, myself with some retailers, and we'll speak with the wholesalers, because the Prime Minister said yesterday, yes, there is a concern that you do these things and it's not passed on to the consumers. All right. I spoke on a show today, and someone volunteered to be a watchdog to watch these things, and we will be watching it. In this budget, we have increased the allocation to the Consumer Affairs Department, Consumer Protection, for us to be able to do things like educate the public, hire some more inspectors to look at these things. And as well, you know, instead of concentrating in one area, we have almost across the board reduced our building materials. That will help people in terms of home repair and home construction. We've increased allocation to social services as well. And so we're bringing relief. Now, interesting with the comments as you attribute to the Leader of the Opposition, budgeting is a balancing act. We try to do a couple of things here. We're trying to promote the growth of the economy, bring relief, and operate within a framework, meaning, you know, there's only so much money you will collect, and if you spend so much, then your borrowing increases, right? So it's a bit of, a puzzle there to, number one, criticize the government for not doing enough. And then on the other hand, criticize the government for to say you will not be able to meet your revenue targets. And then on the third hand, if you had a third hand, to say, well, you know, you're going to borrow all this money. We think that this budget brings significant relief. It's a matter of execution. In terms of the growth in the economy, we have to push and we have to make sure we meet our revenue targets. We're encouraged because this year we expect to finish about, $210 million ahead of our target for last year. And so if we can continue that work, we are about 70% complete in bringing back the revenue enhancement unit, which will do the audits and do the follow-ups to make sure that we're collecting that revenue. We're closing loopholes, as I indicated, in terms of the real property tax, the yachting initiative, which, and again, I would like to say that, technology now will allow us to police that much better. And so I would say, it's a long answer to say, we think we're bringing relief. Of course, it would never be enough, and that is why we keep working. It would never be your work is done. There's always more that can happen. We put $10 million for catastrophic health. That's not enough. Nowhere near enough, but it's a beginning. And again, you're working within a framework of how do you do these things, bring relief. You don't increase taxes to snuff out, the recovery of the economy, but do it all within a framework. And then you're not spending so much money that you're going to have to borrow $1 billion. Yes, sir.
Just to back up a little bit, how much is expected to be gained in revenue from that additional tier of taxation on those luxury homes? Is there a figure that you
There is a
expect to
figure.
receive?
We can get that to you. I mean, I don't know if you brought your charts, but there's a figure. I mean, they for example, we know how much, how many people were impacted and what would be the additional. So I don't have the figure here, but it has been done.
I'm also curious about the projections. I know revenue has been, according to the fiscal projections, exceeding the expectations so far. We saw the GDP drop, or at least debt to GDP drop 20 points. But we also saw the additional borrowing ahead of this budget of $200 million. And I'm curious if expenditure leading up to this point exceeded expectations based on your fiscal projections.
I'll let the FS, maybe when you're done with me, if you got some more like those things that require you to give a number. The first question, we have the number because we do that analysis, but I don't have it right on top of my head because I can tell you, for example, we know, I think it was like 128 individuals who would be impacted at various levels, going from the 60 up to the 120 cap. Some would be, marginally until you go all the way up where the change will be really huge. So, not really huge if we were to take the cap off completely, but I think the number is like 128 properties that fall within that would be impacted by us moving from 60 to 120. And so we have done the analysis to show what it is and what each of those additional tax would be. I just don't have the figure here for that point. The other point was, maybe I'll let the FS take that when he comes up with the actual number. But what has happened, I can say generally, is we're talking about when we talk about us, the revenue exceeding what was forecast from June last year up to this point. And even in terms of expenditure, you had a combination of arrears that had built up, for example, water and sewage corporation insurance premiums. And then you had, the government incurring expenses more than they thought. For example, your COVID-related spending where, some of that had exceeded what was originally forecast. But I think I'll let the FS get down to the actual figures if you want to hear some of that. Anything else for me?
With your response to the opposition leader's comments with regard to the budget not having a solution for the energy crisis that PPL face or the legacy debt that PPL...
Number one, I think we said on more than one occasion that the rate reduction bond, that was conceived in the last Christie administration. At the time, conditions were that, this would be something that could work and to bring down costs. By the passage of time, conditions have changed. I think I've said on more than one occasion that, that the rate reduction bond is, that's off the table. And so, of course, you don't solve the energy crisis in one budget. The Prime Minister spoke about the fact that we've approved a solar farm. There's initiatives in the government in terms of increasing the number of electric cars in the government's fleet. There's incentives for people to purchase electric cars. There is a widening of the duty exemption regime for solar parts, etc. We have a goal of 30% renewable energy by 2030, and our aim is to every year just incrementally chip away at that, and so that eventually we'll be able to reach it. You don't solve crises in one year, but we think we're making some steps. All right, and as we go on, perhaps there's some more things, some additional things that we can do. But no, we wouldn't claim to be able to solve the crisis in one. It's expensive, and we have limits, but we're taking incremental steps.
The opposition leader said yesterday as well. The opposition leader said yesterday as well that the budget communication doesn't line up with the fiscal strategy report that was released earlier. What would be the reason why he would say that?
I don't know. I think that maybe all the standing ovations and the applause may have disoriented him. But, he has to say something. He has to go downstairs and do a press conference. We have people who prepare these numbers. They check them, double-check them. Fiscal strategy report was prepared last year, January, right? January, early this year. Things change. Economic conditions change. Growth rates change. So if the numbers change, it's because of new information that you have. Now, those will be analyzed and dissected. They have been already by our team. It'll be done again by people like the IMF and the IDB and the World Bank, and I'm sure it'll be amplified during the debate. And if he has specific questions as to why he thinks it doesn't line up, we can provide that information. But as to why he would say that, I don't. They had an immediate response, and so I think he needed to have an immediate response. And he didn't want to say, it's a good way forward, so he had to find something to say.
Yesterday, the opposition leader also noted that the budget does not speak to the issues facing NIB. Will we see any address made to that in the upcoming debate?
NIB is what we call a corporation sole. It's standalone corporation. They're not sort of reflected in the budget. The best way to deal with the issues facing national insurance is to do things like address your contribution rates, compliance to make sure that businesses and individuals are paying. You have to do things like try and get better. Well, the most important thing is compliance, to make sure individuals are complying. Things like investment return. And how do we keep administration costs at a manageable level? I would say that, the government of the Bahamas is not going to let national insurance go belly up, all right? So there are things that can be done. I think in reference to an actuarial report, if you look at all the actuarial reports, there is always a statement that certain things have to be done, or else we'll have exhaustion. It's just you have to do the right mix of things to make sure that the fund can not only survive and provide the benefits that it was intended to, but can actually put itself in a better position.
Can you talk about the development of a sovereign wealth fund or funds to take care of any external shocks that could either deepen, as we're in a few of them now, or hurricanes as we're coming into the hurricane season?
Some people call them rainy day funds, and every country sort of aspires to it, to say, well, okay, we'll put something away, in the case of a rainy day. Resource-rich countries, but what we call traditional resource-rich countries, let's say in our region, Trinidad, who has oil wealth, they would establish a fund and deposit, resources in there and also manage it to get return. As we move to the development of a carbon regime and can monetize that and actually concretize that, that's an option for doing it. But as it stands now, in ordinary course of business, it's very difficult for any country I mean, we can even look at from an individual perspective. It's difficult to say, okay, we're going to put something aside for a rainy day. You just because of the demands. The answer is, I think, going forward when we talk about monetizing your carbon assets and then maybe being able to incorporate other assets of the government. The government has a lot of assets in terms of shares in companies, different things. The idea is to put those into a fund, have them managed so we can get a better return. And perhaps that'll be the genesis of something like a rainy day wealth fund.
Speaking of carbon grants, how close are we to actually making that a reality? How much studies need to be done in order to figure out how we get get that actually done?
Well, I'm coming to pull my coat like if I was in church, Very far advanced. There's a high-level committee that has been working on it, and I'm sure they'll be able to share more, but my understanding is we're almost at a point where we're able to submit our proposals to say, here's our carbon regime. And then following that, there's a period of verification and checking, I think, that can last, I understand, maybe a year, 18 months. So a lot of work has been done in the preparatory stages for us to submit. But maybe you'll be able to talk about that, with someone who's more intimately involved with the committee. All right? We have some questions. Thank you very much. As I said, this process will go on. Today is for about a month, we'll be debating budget, and so as things come up and become more pressing, we'll have an opportunity to share some more. Suffice it to say, we feel good. We're confident by the way the economy is going, and barring any setbacks, we feel that with a lot of hard work and diligence, we'll be able to realize the targets that we've set and deliver the promises that we've made in this budget. All right? Thank you very much. And FS, you were awful. Oh, I don't know. Yes.
So, good morning. So, I'm going to get more into the technical side of the budget. The minister addressed most of the policy issues. I think the first issue really is the government's borrowing strategy, and to explain the resolutions that were tabled yesterday. There are two resolutions. One addressed the supplementary budget, and then one addressed the annual budget. The supplementary budget is required because the Public Financial Management Act does not allow the government to put in place or use contingencies. The Act is very inflexible. So we have the resources to make the payments, but we don't have the authority. The $200 million extra in revenue means that we have $200 million which is available that we can use to make payments, but unfortunately we don't have the authority. The only way we can make payments is, according to the Act, is through a mechanism called reallocation. Reallocation means I can move money from one item, from one ministry to the next ministry to make a payment. The Act limits reallocation to 3%. So roughly $60 million. So what has happened is that even though we have benefited from improved revenue flows, we are constrained how we can spend that money, hence the need for a supplementary budget. The way the supplementary budget is presented, we have to ask for the full borrowing authority, even though about 25% of that amount, which is in the supplementary budget, has already been paid through reallocations. We have to ask for the full authority, the full borrowing amount. So the amount the total amount that has been requested is probably not going to be the amount needed, because we've asked for, $205 million for supplementary. We've already paid around $60 million through reallocations. So I think that's a very, very important point. The second point is when you look, the second point, which is equally important, is that when you look at the upcoming budget and the forward years, you look at, there's a measure which is called the primary deficit, which is in essence, the amount that you borrow to pay interest charges. If you borrow to pay interest, your debt is growing at a much faster rate. Next year, the primary deficit will be approximately 0% in the upcoming budget forecast. And the following year, it's forecasted to be 2% positive, which means that the trajectory for our debt is moving in a positive way and a much faster rate than we anticipated because of the economic expansion. So I think that when you speak about debt and debt levels, you have to look at those two factors there. And any other questions before I admit?
You mentioned economic expansion just now. That compared to what? Compared to pre-pandemic? Compared to...
Well, pre-pandemic is much rapid, but compared to the projection in terms of how the recovery from pandemic will happen. When we prepared the fiscal strategy report, we anticipated a much slower rate of growth. It has grown much rapidly. All right, so that's the first thing. Nobody anticipated double-digit return in growth rates. And I think the governor, the central bank, and his public statements talked about the fact that the economy has expanded at a much more rapid rate than anybody anticipated. And he provided the best example. Look at our reserve levels. Our reserve levels are $3 billion, and that's not driven by official transfers, but driven by purchases of foreign currency by the central bank from the commercial banks, which speaks to the rapid rate of economic expansion. No more questions?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So listen, in the Department of Social Services, I believe I saw a line item for social assistance benefits. And the last fiscal period is about $25 million. It's been zeroed off for the next 3 fiscal periods. I was just curious, was it transferred somewhere? I didn't see it anywhere else.
It wasn't transferred. So that was apparently that was the food program, the remaining money for the food program. That was the remaining money. That $25 million was put there to fund the food program. Last year, on this current budget, that was put there to fund the food program. It was not utilized because the food program ended in October, as you know.
Is it safe to say that money's been going back to the Treasury in that case? What happens, or it's been allocated elsewhere?
Most of it has been allocated back in social services, and then the rest allocated elsewhere. Because if you look at pre-pandemic social assistance, the increase has been about 50%. Yes.
Out of curiosity then, there is a separate line item, I believe, for the food assistance program, which would have been in the previous budget as well. So with the food assistance
The
line
food
item-
assistance program was in the Ministry of Finance.
Right. So
Yeah.
is that in addition to the $25 million for social services?
Yeah, so
benefits, also for the food assistance program?
That's my understanding. Obviously, I wasn't here when the budget was put together, but when we asked, that was conveyed to me.
I think this week the banks were supposed to start the payoffs for the real property tax. Do you know if that happened?
You should speak to the folks at Inland Revenue. I know we have, I've seen advertised in the papers, so I assume things are happening. But we'll leave it at that. I don't get involved at that level. All right? Thank you so much.
I have a question. Did we find $53 million anywhere? As we put in this budget again?
You're talking about
Did we find it anywhere?
you mean the 53 million?
Yeah, the food that we put in the budget. Did we find it anywhere?
Well, have you read the Food Task Force report?
I just want to know if we found it anywhere. Was any money just sitting anywhere?
Well, I think the Food Task Force report indicated that transfers from the Treasury to certain NGOs were not recorded by NGOs properly. up to almost 5% or 10% of the amount. That work has not, I want to be careful how we say it, but there's no audit statements for any NGOs. And none have been provided to date. So there may be a possibility that the agreed upon procedures, the review, may not have covered everything that needs to be covered. But that's as far as I'll say.
So based on that, you're saying there's no real way to tell if the venue is really appropriately utilize these funds?
Well, you have to, what I'm saying is that you have to believe the information provided by the NGOs. If they say to you, I spend the money on X, you have to believe that because there is no other financial statements. My own view is that if you're getting millions of dollars for a public program, you should be able to provide back an audited financial statement saying this is how the money was used. What we have, and I think the review highlighted that quite clear, is what we have is that the NGOs provide information back to the entity that was doing the review. The entity reported back to the government tabled that report. We make no other things than that trail. The report, I believe, speaks for itself.
Mr. Wilson, there was no fiscal snapshot released prior to the budget. Why would there be? Because the leading opposition said yesterday there wasn't a fiscal snapshot, so we were wondering what happened to it.
Because I can tell you, one of the challenges that we have is that the PFM Act speaks to a timetable of reports. A timetable which, if you understand the systems that we operate under, cannot be met if you are serious about doing it properly. That is a challenge. And as we revise the PFM Act, we will try to move away from this rigidity with respect to that. Because the systems that we have, our main system is 30 years old. For us to close accounts requires a lot of work, and that's a challenge. So we try and adjust that. It's a lot of work just to keep pace with all these various reports because the systems are outdated, unfortunately.
Yeah. Speaking to the public financial management project, is that still ongoing?
The project is, yes.
Okay.
It's wrapping up soon.
Sorry, very lastly, is there an idea of the cost of the new prison complex as outlined by the Prime Minister in the budget communication?
Not that I know of. I think that's a P3, so there has to be some negotiations in terms of what the requirements are from the Department of Corrections, and then the costing, and then obviously the Ministry Works have to weigh in to say if the costing is legitimate costing based on the requirements. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, FS. We're just about our time now, so I'm going to move real quick to give you a couple announcements and take any other questions you may have from Prime Minister. Obviously, this week, an exciting week. The Davis administration is continuing its support in sports. We're pleased to announce that the NACAC Championships will be hosted in Grand Bahama this year. That's the regional international competition that's going to be held here. At the championships will see some 500 athletes, coaches, and officials head to Freeport for the event. The three-day event is good news for local athletes and the economy of that island. Prime Minister Davis remains committed to supporting the youth of this nation and our athletes, particularly through sports. Also, Prime Minister Davis met with the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for the Western Hemisphere Affairs, Brian Nichols, earlier this week. At the courtesy call, the pair discussed their views on democracy, peace, and security. With the upcoming Summit of Americas convening next month, Prime Minister Davis and U.S. Assistant Secretary Nichols spoke about the importance of the event as a push for global climate change, resilience, and energy security. Officials of the United States Embassy and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Bahamas were also in attendance at the courtesy call. He also brought a message looking forward to the Bahamas' intervention at the Summit of the Americas, particularly on regional discussions like climate change and also cryptocurrency and a number of other areas the Bahamas is leading on. Any other questions that you may want to have for the administration that I can take before we wrap up this afternoon? That is so wonderful. Carl, I think you had a question, yes. No, I saw you giving me that look like I have a question. Yes.
As a taxpayer,
Mm-hmm.
I am really perturbed that $53 million could just simply just disappear and nobody's being held accountable.
It's a concern. Prime Minister Davis would have said. This is why he's been speaking about it, perhaps much to the annoyance of people who've been hearing and not wanting him to talk about it in Parliament. He said this is why he has presented the audit report. He has talked about it because he believes the Bahamian people deserves an answer as to how their money was spent. Those, as we say again, those records should be on file for any administration, the previous administration, the present administration. Those records should be on file, detailed with accounts of how the money was spent, who it was spent to, what amount of the money was spent, and so forth. Prime Minister Davis has said in coming to office, there were no clear records on how this money was spent, which is why the audit report was convened, to be able to determine answers. And in that report, the audit report, as we made public, will say their concerns as well as far as what they were able to gain, those who were able to submit information as to what they did with the money, and those who didn't. It is still an outstanding concern as to the money. And that is why it has baffled us that the questions have been coming to the administration about why are you going after XYZ, why are you doing this, rather than why aren't people accounting for the money they were given. And I said it last week, and I repeat it again. Every week we keep asking the Davis administration to give an account for monies it's spending, but we don't put that same kind of measure of accountability to people who had to entrust the people's money. And I would hope that my colleagues would take up the challenge to investigate it and to ask questions. And instead of doing other things, dancing around it, ask people, well, you were in charge of the program. You were part of the program. What did you do with the money that was given to you? How much money was given to you? It's a public program, so it's not a private discussion. You should be able, as a journalist, to go to any of the people who benefited from the program as far as being contracted and ask them, how much were you given? How much did you spend? Who were the vendors you spent it with? It's not a private matter. It's the people's funds. And they should be able to answer you publicly on that. Government continues to be baffled by it as well. But it's something that the government is not reneging on or going back on. We continue to investigate until we get some answers to the Bahamian people. We will continue to pursue it. Any other questions?
Financial officers, can you just make sense of what really happened with regards to the union is saying that they're asking Minister Brill to retract the statements, but according to her, there was an audit report. This first financial officers having to pay themselves $4 million. What is the government's position on that?
Again, I always try to tell people to understand. Sometimes we shoot the spokesperson rather than the information, right? And if an audit report is recounting something and saying what happens, the minister is just regurgitating exactly what the audit report says. And so the question should be, what has happened in the process, right? And people have gone after the minister, but she's recounting what has been in the audit report. We're trying to get to the bottom of it as well ourselves. And I think what's important here is, while we're doing it, of course, respecting the rights of every civil servant and ensuring that people are treated with respect, which is what the Davis administration aims to always do in investigating matters. And we're trying to understand the whole picture as to what took place. I think what is key to this is, the important thing to understand is, and the officers said it themselves, oh, we can't pay ourselves and all of that stuff. Somebody had to authorize it. It was done in the previous administration, and there were some senior people who are no longer in office, who may have retired and who may have done other things, moved on, who obviously would have assisted and participated in carrying out what may have been done by cabinet. And so that's why we're tracking to see what transpired, and at the end of the day, how to fix it without putting blame on people who are working today, or without saying the government lied. It's just to try and fix it. And hopefully we can come back next week, because we're working on the matter, and be able to say it was fixed or addressed, and here's what really transpired. But I think at the end of the day, we have to put the blame at the feet of where it originated from and why it was not executed properly at the end of the day. And that's what we're trying to do. The minister has the information. And let me say, because I know it was said by a union leader that she's in over her head, and she's not. She's quite skilled at what she's doing, and she's been quite effective at what she's doing. In the 8 months that she's been in office, she has gotten people regulated, and monies are overdue, and she's gotten things sorted out that has been sitting on shelves for years. Does that look like somebody who's in over their head? She's working. She's working hard, and her passion is for the people. She's not new to the public service. She's worked in that ministry before. She understands quite well how it should work. And so I push back on that statement that she's in over her head. She's not. She's quite capable. She's quite able, and if she's made statements, if you understand the minister, she's quite able to stand behind what she does. And I'm not going to get into who's right, who's wrong, who's offended, who's not, who needs an apology. She's about fixing the problem and addressing the problem, and the administration wants to make sure it's addressed. But the pushback I will give is on describing her as being in over her head. She's quite capable and quite competent, and the main people who have received her efforts and the people who work under her in getting them sorted out will agree that they're very grateful. And I don't want to take anything away from what she's doing because of a matter that's before in public domain right now, because she's working assiduously hard and she wants fairness. And I think that should count for something as a minister of state, that she's working extremely hard. I was a member of unions before, so I understand how union leaders work and go. And sometimes things are said because you want to ensure that the people you serve as president for believe you are working and working hard. But sometimes we say things to the detriment of us as nation builders. And she's working hard, and the matter will be resolved. Any other questions? Okay, so that concludes our press briefing for today. We don't have any vendors for you today as we were transitioning from one place to the other. And so we will come back bigger and better for you next week. Jasper, don't you give me that look. I know you're hungry. But we'll have you all sorted out for next week. That concludes our press briefing. All of you watching by television or streaming, thank you for joining us. I would look forward to the budget debate beginning next week, Wednesday. Good afternoon.